Welcome, everyone. We're here today with the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. My name is Benlolo, and I'm here with four distinguished rabbis from across the country who I'm thrilled to have with us today. We have with us Rabbi Yael Splansky, who's a senior rabbi at Holy Blossom here in Toronto. We have Rabbi Dan Moskovitz, senior rabbi of Temple Shalom in Vancouver. Rabbi Reuven Bulka, who's a rabbi emeritus of Congregation Machzikei Hadas and president and CEO of Kind Canada, Généreux, and Rabbi Reuven Poupko, a rabbi of Beth Israel Beth Aaron congregation in Montreal. It's really a pleasure to have this distinguished panel from across the country with us today. So welcome to you all. We're going to have a series of questions today. We wanted to get a feel, a read of what is going on in your communities. We're all dealing with COVID-19, which has unfortunately taken away and sadly many, many lives and impacted congregations and communities throughout. And so we wanted to really share this information with the community at large from coast to coast. So perhaps what we'll do, and as we go along, I'll call on your names and ask a question, and anyone else can jump in as well. Perhaps we'll start with Rabbi Bulka. Rabbi, can you tell us a little bit, perhaps 1 to 2 minutes, about how this has impacted your community as a way to introduce the conversation?
Well, I think our community is not unique to all of the other communities across Canada and probably across the world. We shut the synagogue down a while ago, but in the larger context of the community itself, a lot of the things that we did face-to-face, we're now doing by Zoom and other methods. But the most important impact it's had is that it's brought up a sensitivity to the plight of people who are much less fortunate. So in our community, through Federation, for example, we've had to deal with issues such as Hillel Lodge. Once parents could not be visited by their children, the media created a gap in terms of having to have more staff coming in so that the patients in the lodge are not lonely. This created a financial burden. So what has happened is that we've become much more sensitive to some of the needs, and the needs have increased, and they've come from all sorts of places. The ones that are obvious are in terms of food and shelter and things of that nature, but even the other ones that are impacted by the collateral damage that the virus has caused. And the community has really banded together in an exemplary fashion, as it has probably in all other places.
That's wonderful to hear, and I'm thrilled to see that. And I wanted to as well, Rabbi Poupko. Quebec has been impacted quite tremendously by COVID-19. We're hearing it in the news. We're seeing your premier, his various comments about it, the healthcare system. How has it impacted, the Jewish community? In addition to that,
as always, almost always. There are always unique features to life in Quebec that distinguish us. We are a distinct society, as you know. And so there are internal issues and external issues. We've had a significant rise in anti-Semitic comments on websites, on social media and on news websites. There's no question that Jews played a role in the initial weeks of Corona in the narrative of contagion. We in Montreal have the second largest Hasidic community in North America. And in those communities which enjoy intense population density in their homes, aren't always connected to media in the way the rest of us are. And there was, maybe a distrust of secular authority. But for whatever reason, there were events early on that played a central role in the contagion story, in the corona story in Quebec. And although it's been 3 or 4 weeks since any of that, the comments on websites have been quite distressing. Jewish organizations are dealing with that on a daily basis, getting them removed. And there haven't been acts of vandalism or anti-Semitic swastikas, things like that, as you have in Toronto. But we haven't had any of that in Montreal, thank God. But the comments on social media are very distressing. But I also have to say that as many times as journalists try to bait the premier to comment specifically on Boisbriand or the Hasidic community or Côte Saint-Luc, the premier was very, very careful never to do that, and avoided any singling out of the Jewish community. That's the external issue. Internally, we have an absolute slow motion catastrophe in our nursing homes, as people have everywhere in New York or Europe or in Boston. There have been terrible stories that should not have occurred, and people should have been better prepared. But we have that ongoing crisis. Right now in Quebec, as of a couple of days ago, 90% of the deaths in Quebec due to COVID, close to 90%, have been nursing home deaths. Yep. And the Jewish nursing homes, like every other nursing home, have all been implicated in this, and this is an ongoing catastrophe. But as Rabbi Bulka has said in reference to Ottawa, what's been most inspiring is the degree of volunteerism reaching out to the isolated, reaching out to those who are in need, and people who for the first time can't be visited by family, even family in town, let alone family from out of town. So there's an enormous amount of volunteerism through many different organizations, whether federation or others, who are reaching out to those who are isolated and in need. But that's part of the story, yes.
Yeah, and I think that is a big part of the story. In fact, the unity and the way that it's brought us all together, even like this, right? How often do we ever do this kind of thing as Jewish organizations and Jewish leaders across the country? We hardly ever do this kind of thing. So this is an example of it. And, Rabbi Splansky, I wanted to ask you as well, what do you think? I'm trying to keep things positive, because there's so much, there's so much out there. What do you think, in your view, we can be proud of as communities across Canada?
So there's much to be proud of at this time. What I'm finding is that people are leaning into their Judaism in ways that they weren't before. When life was so busy and so distracting and so many pressures in the daily busyness, not everyone was able to prioritize daily prayer, daily study, meaningful connections with their religious communities. And now we're finding that people are turning to us in ways like never before. And so I am proud of that. And I feel that we have exactly what is needed at this time. People do need to be reminded that they're not alone. People do need to be able to draw from stores of strength, from our history, from our calendar, right? When every day seems the same. I don't know if it's Tuesday or Wednesday, but I know it's Shabbat. And I know Pesach was coming, and now I know Yom HaTzmaut is coming. So we're able to mark time also through the life cycle. So we're finding very meaningful ways of still carrying on with the life cycle. Some people think, we're just going to put our lives on hold until we can gather again for that wedding. I met with a couple yesterday. They asked, we were there to be married this August, and asked if I was available next August. And I said, well, I'll be there for you, but if you want to get married, you should be married. Don't put your lives on hold. And they said they hadn't yet thought of that. And their parents hadn't suggested that because everyone was so focused on the hora, and being able to embrace. But really what matters to them is they want to be married and get on with their lives. So I find we're very lucky in our Jewish tradition that we've got the goods. We have exactly what people need at this moment.
And, and these days, there's some background noise. These days, the community needs your leadership more than ever, I find. And, as they have these questions about meaning and support and mental health issues. And I did want to ask Rabbi Moskovitz as well. You're in Vancouver. It's we have a very big country. Tell us about how it is in Vancouver. How is the community there faring through this? Because I know in Vancouver, I've heard that there's a loosening up of the economy. I don't know if this is accurate. So tell us a little bit about your experience in that part of Canada.
Thank you, Avi. I mean, I think that my experience and that of our community at large is really very similar to across the country. We're all home. It's amazing. I call congregants and they're home. It's easy to reach people. I resonate with all of what my colleagues have said. It's not that different here in Vancouver, although the sun is shining and we can get outdoors, and so people are doing that with proper social distancing. I think that, you know, what I've seen in our community is, you know, as Rabbi Splansky said, is this need to be of service to others, this call for chesed. You know, there's a line in Talmud that says tzedakah saves from death, and what we learn from that is that chesed is what gets us up in the morning, not for ourselves but for others. And so I see a tremendous outpouring in our congregation and the broader community. In our congregation alone, we're calling every single family in our 900 family congregation. I know many shuls are doing that. We're delivering chalot. People that were never making challah before are now delivering chalot to their neighbors just with Pesach, because the weather was nice. We have a couple of blocks in Vancouver. It's a relatively small Jewish community of about 30,000, but there's a few streets where there's a lot of Jews living on those streets, and they had front yard seders. Everybody set up a bridge table in their front yard, and far enough away but close enough that they could hear the four questions, and they could sing Dayenu together, and that was really remarkable. So what's incredible to me is that, you know, the edict that has come down that we need to stay apart and be separate has actually brought us together. And I'm seeing more people showing up for services online. We were able to make an arrangement with TELUS, so we're broadcasting our services coast to coast on TELUS TV, and we're getting hundreds of people tuning in to watch those services. And I know those are people that were not normally in shul. As much as I love my Shabbos crowd, there's a new Shabbos crowd, and for that matter, a Mincha and a Shachrit crowd, and for online Talmud study. So the accessibility that this has created. But just briefly, it has also created disparity. Our seniors don't have the same access to technology. Children are not seeing their friends, and they need to be proximate. They need to have that social contact. Texting, for whatever we thought about teens and texting, it's not enough for the younger kids. And they're starting to wonder and worry, where are their friendships and what's going to happen with camp. So I'm seeing a growing anxiety, while at the same time I'm seeing a sense of purpose and meaning in people doing mitzvahs for each other, that's what gets them through the day, not for me, but for others, which is the whole point of this social distancing, that we are in this together, and I'm staying home not to keep myself safe, but to keep you safe.
That's a great answer, and very, very meaningful to think about chesed and mitzvot, and really it's tikkun olam, and the Jewish contributions to the world are spectacular. You know, I got an email from one of our members yesterday that unfortunately his sister passed away from COVID-19, and you know, he wasn't able to attend her funeral. He had to do it by FaceTime, and I imagine this is causing a lot of havoc and hardship in your communities. And I'm wondering if there's any thoughts about that, if anyone wants to jump in.
You know what's it's very painful for people. We've all done funerals, either with COVID victims or just during this time of social distancing, and the loss of not having a normal shiva, the loss of not being able to pay someone a fitting tribute when they leave this world, because it's so limited how many people can attend. It is a source of great pain. But you know what I think we all realize is that for the kids, this will be some of the most memorable days of their lives. They're going to be telling their grandchildren about this. Yep. And we all have to, as the adults in the room, think about the stories they're going to be telling. We're now shaping the stories. And the stories they're going to tell their children and grandchildren 30 years from now and 60 years from now are being shaped now. We have to remember that. We're shaping their memories for the future. And they should be telling stories of how their families reached out, how they realized what they were missing and therefore valued it more going forward. I walked around in my neighborhood on one of the days of the Chag of Pesach, and it was astonishing. You see people, and they all say to me, "Rabbi, I miss shul." Now, I don't know if they miss me, but they miss shul, which is wonderful. And it's nice to hear, but to cherish the things that we sometimes take for granted is a cliche, but it is certainly true. And it's a time, as the others have said, when people are reaching down deeper and remembering how valuable the connections are, and how valuable Judaism is, and how valuable it is to be with other people. And we created those connections, thank God, through technology, but how much we really are social beings and how much we really do need to be with each other.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask a hard question again. Anyone can jump in. Everyone is looking for meaning. Is there any meaning behind this? Is there anything that we can draw on from our biblical texts, from God, from Hashem, and bring it into an understanding from a religious, traditional perspective?
I would just offer a couple of things. I think that one is that the teaching from Viktor Frankl, of course, comes to mind, that people can endure anything if they can find meaning. And as I mentioned before, the meaning in this right now is that we need to stay home and apart so that we can stay safe. The challenge is that not unlike in World War II or in other times, we don't know when that's going to end. We live in a world of certainty now, but our ancestors lived in a world of uncertainty. And not so far ago, when they didn't know if the Nazis were going to be defeated. They didn't know if the crops were going to come back or the pogrom was going to end or any of those things. And so I think we have to look to our history. And what we see there is two things that come to mind. One is we see Jewish innovation. We see a flexibility, a resourcefulness within our tradition all the way back to the rabbinic period in responding to being, kicked out of that temple and having to create a Judaism without walls. And we also see a response with faith, that in moments of crisis, we yearn for God, we reach out for God. We just had a Seder that spoke about the Israelites crying out to God and God hearing our voice. So I think that the response from history has been innovation within the Jewish community and faith. And I think we need both of those. And through that, maybe we can get through this. And it is living with uncertainty, which is maybe one of the hardest things that human beings do.
Very, very good point. I like that point that, it's living with uncertainty, but, in a way there is still certainty that I'm hoping that we know that there will be an end. Rabbi Splansky, any thoughts on that?
Yes. So while I would never say that this plague was sent to teach us lessons, that this is some punishment that is deserved, I would say that there are nevertheless lessons to be learned. And some of the things that we can take away from this are, one, that we are one humanity. We've always known that, but it's only reinforced now. This virus knows no bounds between countries, between races, between religions, between classes. We really are all connected. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I hope we can learn from this is that we actually don't need as much stuff as we thought we did, and that we can slow down the production and the buying, and that we can take it easy on our planet because there's only so much it can sustain.
I agree with all of that.
I just wanted to add that generally speaking, I cringe when I hear people saying that they know what the meaning of all this is. I've heard some people saying, this is a punishment from God. We don't really know. But enlarging upon what Rabbi Moskovitz said, we don't know the meaning of it, but we can give a meaning to it. That's a totally different thing. Mm-hmm. And there are so many interesting meanings that have come through. But one of the major crises that we're probably going to face now more than we did in the first month, where it was somewhat of a novelty, is if it sinks in that this is a long haul thing, the mental health of people is going to be suffering pretty dramatically. Yeah. And what we need to really do is sort of turn the equation around and have people see this as an opportunity. If the attitude that we take is we're locked into prison, we're in isolation, and woe is unto us, we're going to be in trouble. If we take the attitude that this is great, we now have the time that we never had before to think about how we can make life better for others. And for mental health, by the way, as a general rule, the more that you think about others and how you can help them, the better your mental health is going to be. And the more you're going to focus on yourself, the worse your mental health is going to be. So this self-transcendence, which is another wonderful concept that Viktor Frankl accentuated, is going to help everyone else. It's also going to help us when we do that.
Very good point. Social action and activism, tikkun olam, all keep us very busy and engaged in the world around us, and not as I guess maybe not as self-reflective, which can sometimes hurt us. And this is an issue. I want to ask you maybe just a couple last questions before we head out. Let me start with this one because it was already mentioned. It was one of my closing questions, but Rabbi Poupko mentioned it earlier on. Obviously, we have seen a rise of anti-Semitism and the linkage with the coronavirus to anti-Semitism, which reminds us of our past, and almost every century we've been linked to some kind of virus or some kind of mythology. And so I wanted to know if there are any additional thoughts or comments about that. Our institution's obviously been outspoken about it and so forth, but how do you see this affecting other communities? Maybe Rabbi Poupko in Vancouver, has this impacted your community?
In Montreal, as I mentioned.
I'm sorry, I meant Rabbi Moskovitz in Vancouver.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. We have a very large Chinese population in Vancouver, and I think that all of our community sees their experience of this virus through the lens of our own experience as Jews. And I have seen an outpouring of support within the Jewish community for the Chinese community, not a community that we've had a lot of contact with prior to this, largely because of language and cultural barriers. And yet it still always comes around to the Jews also. And so whereas as Rabbi Poupko explained, there have been associations of this with Jewish communities, and we think about the East Coast in particular. While I haven't had direct instances of Jew hatred or anti-Semitism here, we do see just the growing environment, the climate of xenophobia, of racism, of othering. And so, again, we merge our community and our hearts with those of the Chinese community, and trying to bring actually all faith communities together in a show of solidarity. That, as Rabbi Splansky said, this virus knows no language, knows no boundaries, knows no barriers, knows no cultures. It affects all of us. And the real message in this is the message that we have always said about anti-Semitism and Jew hatred from the beginning, which is that what begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And that if we allow that hatred in society for any one of us, it will affect all of us. And so I think that again, one of the blessings amidst the curse is that we can bring ourselves together as a humanity in the midst of this and see that we really don't have differences. We have uniqueness and distinction, which is the mosaic that makes our country and our world wonderful. But we all have the same humanity and the same vulnerabilities.
The other, a lot of people say during a moment like this, we're reminded of how little is under our control. We think we have control. But the truth is, while that's absolutely accurate, there is so much beyond our control. But what these moments and these weeks have proven to us is how much is under our control. If you read the reports from 2006 that the American government prepared on how to deal with the pandemic, they all wrote, well, people will never adhere to social distancing. People will never listen. And in fact, they have listened. And in fact, the worst, most dire predictions haven't been realized. People took this seriously. A lot has been under our control. That's why all of the estimations of loss haven't, in fact, unfolded in the way that experts thought. We did take control. We did close our synagogues, our schools, our businesses, and we are listening. And because of that, the rate of contagion has been dramatically less than people thought. And as it relates to hate, anti-Semitism, as we all know, is not related to Jewish behavior. We know that. And in this moment, in the stories and everything else, no one's become an anti-Semite because of Corona. But the anti-Semites have used it and harnessed it to talk, as a weapon in their arsenal. But some of the comments and some of the statements and some of the behavior has been egregious against the Asian community, the Chinese community, the Jewish community. But no one should walk away thinking this triggered hatred. This has simply emboldened the hatred. But what's also wonderful to see is how much support we get and how much support we give and how much we receive from the broader community. It still is. The hate still does only come from a fringe.
And anti-Semites usually look for every opportunity to leverage and latch on in order to utilize it to spread anti-Semitism.
And I think that also in adding on to the words of my dear colleagues, I don't think that we should be cowed by this. It's true that this is happening. Rabbi Poupko says perfectly that this has not created anti-Semitism. It's just given it another forum, unfortunately. But the more that we can be out in the forefront in terms of advocacy, not of a particular nature, but just in terms of encouraging Canadians. And the top of the things that we're doing to share them with the broader community in whatever forum that we have access to. Just as an example, a little while ago, I called the Archbishop in Ottawa, and we together composed a prayer for Canada, and we reread it together. It went on to CTV, national news. I think outreaches like that to other communities where we show this togetherness, that's probably the best way to fight the hatred, is by showing this extraordinary connection and love between communities.
Completely agreed. In fact, I hosted an interfaith panel on Zoom just a few days ago for the same reason. And as we know, last night was the start of Ramadan, so extending good wishes. And I think that that's a very, very good method to really reach out to all Canadians. I just want to leave you with one final question. What are we proud of in terms of Judaism, and what are you proud of in terms of Judaism, and how can we leave our community with that positive feeling? I'm prouder than ever to be Jewish, to be supportive of Israel and the amazing work that is coming out of Israel in terms of science and technology, and to be Canadian and the incredible support of our government in dealing with COVID-19. Really, we have the best as a Jewish people from really our entire history. We couldn't be living in a better time, and so to me, that's what I'm proud of. And I wanted to know if any of you have some final thoughts on that.
So, listen, there's lots to be proud of. I think what's also nice to see is that a lot of the things that we may have been doing well beforehand now are a little bit more out in the open in social media. We actually have shown that one of the changes that has happened is that instead of people going to shul, the shul has gone to the people. And in that, there are a lot of people that are privy to the things that we are doing. And so the good things in terms of communal concern and of sensitivity and things like calling others, they have become almost like buzzwords of the pandemic era. That is to say that people are seeing the things that we are doing, emulating them. Imitation is the highest form of flattery. And that is actually a very important part of the lessons learned and the messages that are being sent. And I mean, jokingly aside, I remember one, and this is going to be my closing comment for today. We call this COVID-19. So I say, there's something in it, because high, as we know, is our number, like 18. So 19 is high plus 1. We hope that this will give us added life and gusto and zeal for the future.
Amen. Amen, Rabbi. Any other closing comments?
I think what we're all proudest of is the response of our people to other people, and the numbers of calls we all get from those who want to help others, the calls we all get from people who want to connect, who are worried about the 95-year-old Holocaust survivor who's living alone, about the people in the nursing homes, and what they can do to deliver. There's been an outpouring of generosity, concern, and compassion. And that is, of course, what we should be proudest of. That is the strongest part of our tradition, and that which unites us in the best way.
Absolutely, you said it. Rabbi Splansky?
Sure. So I think religions of all kinds are often given a bad rap, that we are static and stuck in the past. But what we've seen from this is certainly the Jewish community and other faith traditions as well are quite nimble in our responses and quite creative. And we're showing that we know how to respond in the moment and to give expression to our core values, to let our faith guide us in serving one another. So I'm proud of that. It gives me confidence for the future. Yom Ha'atzmaut is just on the horizon, so I find myself more and more saying, Am Yisrael Chai, right here we are. Right. We continue to endure. We are an eternal people. And that gives me the strength to face forward and do our part to buoy our good country at this time.
I love that. Am Yisrael Chai. I love that. And lastly, Rabbi Moskovitz.
You know, I too am very proud of our community and really across Canada, the Canadian community and those around the world that are doing such acts of good and chesed. You know, the Jewish response to a crisis is not to ask why or even why me, but it's to ask what and what of me now? What does this ask of me now? And that's how we've responded. What do I do now? And we've responded with these incredibly innovative and compassionate acts of kindness. And I look at Israel and I look at you know, because we do take some Jewish pride in seeing Jewish names all across the media in science and technology and the medical field, and to see that they are right there in the mix, trying to find the cure, trying to find the treatment. I'm proud that we're a part of this. I'm proud that we're bringing our years of intellectual rigor and a belief in science and our faith to this. And I'm proud of the simple acts that are happening every day, of the challah delivery and the caring phone calls and the seniors and the Holocaust survivors that are getting groceries delivered to them because they say, Bubby, you shouldn't leave the house. We're going to take care of it for you. And you're not even my Bubby. But right now, everybody's my Bubby. I'm proud of that.
Wonderful. What a wonderful way to close, and hopeful and, introspective. Thank you all for this, for your time, for your leadership and your endurance. We very, very much need you. Thank you all, and Shabbat Shalom.